Greetings! My name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. And avast ye scurvy dogs, it is time to raise that black flag and join the Kobold crew. For today, Kelly and I are going to dive into the first playtest packet for Project Black Flag, the new core fantasy rules that are going to support 5th edition under the open role-playing creative license for third-party publishers going forward.
Now, for those of you who don't know, Kobold Press, a great third-party publisher in the 5e space, has announced that they are making their own game system which will build on and support the 5th edition rule set. This is called Project Black Flag. Now, they've released their first playtest document, and Monty and I are going to be looking over it today and discussing our thoughts. But it should be kept in mind that we will be often using comparisons to the 5th edition rules, and Black Flag even says in the playtest document that it is branching off of the 5th edition rules for everything that it is showcasing. It even says that you should be using the core classes and features of 5th edition as you start going into Black Flag. So those comparisons are not saying that everything needs to be compared to D&D, but this specific project is being compared to 5th edition D&D because it's almost like a sister model to what D&D 5e presents.
If you're not familiar with Kobold Press, they are a fantastic RPG publisher that has produced the Tome of Beasts and Creature Codex supplements for 5th edition, which added a huge number of monsters to use in a variety of campaigns and worlds, as well as their Midgard campaign setting and a variety of other excellent supplements. Project Black Flag is very notable because Kobold Press is working in tandem and in a network that they are building with several other RPG publishers, including our very good friends at Ghostfire Gaming as well. And so we are very excited about what is coming with Project Black Flag and all the new ways that this is going to be developing forward. Some of the brains behind this include Celeste Konowich and Wolfgang Bauer, who are some fantastically talented and creative TTRPG authors. So I'm very looking forward to diving in what they do with this project.
There's going to be links in the description of this video to the playtest documents, so if any of you want to click on that and follow along as we're discussing it, you absolutely can. And full disclosure, this video is not sponsored by Kobold Press. We're just excited about what they're doing and want to talk about the game system they're building. With all of that, let's get rolling.
So Project Black Flag was only recently announced, and so this playtest packet is only 12 pages long. It's just a little bit of stuff to give a bit of what I would consider an appetizer of the things to come.
A lot of what's in this packet is the general first few pages of what you would find in, say, the Player's Handbook of 5th edition. That's sort of getting to know the game system and getting to understand the core ideals of what it's presenting.
And I think one of the first things that I really like about this playtest packet, from just a theory crafting sort of point of view, is the core fantasy in a nutshell section, where they kind of lay out 5 general principles of core fantasy. That core fantasy is for worlds that have magic. It is for heroic adventures. It is focused around adventures that explore unique locations. It has factions and power structures and systems, and it's about conflict. And I think that identifying these elements of what the game is about is really important for talking about what the vision is going forward. And in a lot of ways, I actually kind of want more about this from Kobold Press. I want to hear what their design goals are, and I want to hear what are the things that are going to get under the hood, and what do they love, what do they want to change. I'm really interested to hear that.
You get some general stuff in the first page and a half that tells you what a role-playing game is, how to use your dice, all of those sort of things that if you have been playing D&D already, or really any other TRPG, a lot of this is stuff that you're pretty used to seeing in any book and that most of us glaze over anyway. But that little section did stand out to me as something fun and kind of interesting to read and just get the idea of this is a fantasy system that we're building. This is what a fantasy world looks and feels like, and I appreciate that.
So just to reflect on that, I think that the introductory stuff is super cool, and I'm glad to see it. But at this stage in the process, I really want to hear more about the design goals. I want to hear more about the design philosophy, and I want to hear more about the thought process that's going into it and what sort of outcomes the team at Cobalt Press is looking for with the changes they're making. I would be totally happy to read pages and pages and pages talking about what works and what doesn't work and what you're trying out and what you want to hear feedback on. Get that to me. I want to hear it.
So from there, the document jumps into character creation. A lot of this is pretty standard stuff. We've seen it before, but there are some little changes, or actually they're big changes in little ways, to the generation of ability scores. The main thing that stands out to me is that when you do point buy or the standard array, these both are presented slightly differently than they were in 5th edition. The point buy gives you more points to divvy up, and you can go as high as a score of 18. With the standard array, we have 16, 15, 13, 12, 10, 8, which is almost identical to the one Monty and I use, except our 16 is a 17. So Cobalt Press, if you want to make it a 17, we say go for it. But interestingly enough, if you are using either the standard array or the point buy, you do not get bonuses to your ability scores from your lineage or heritage. We're going to talk more about that in a second, but the only way that you get additional bonuses is if you rolled for your stats. I find this pretty interesting, but it is baked in that you are getting a higher array or more points to divvy up.
So just parsing it out with this point buy, an 18 costs 16 points, and they're giving you 32 points. So you could do 18, 18, and all your other stats at 8.
That's like super min-maxy version. Yeah, that's it feels a little rough to have 8 in every stat except for your 2 18s, but...
Yeah, so the flip side is if you spread them all out, you get a 13 in every stat with a 14 as your highest stat.
That also feels like you're a jack of all trades, sure, but you're not, what do they say? Jack of all trades, expert of none, master of none.
So you can also get... So the interesting thing here as well is that you can also get an 18 and 2 14s, because a 14 is 7 points. So 16, and then you have 2, so 18, 14, 14, 10, 8, 8.
That feels a little bit more well-rounded to me. Yes. That's probably somewhere
That's dumping. That's a spellcaster with an 18 who gets a good dexterity, a good constitution, and then dumps their strength and charisma.
Now, also, you could go with the 18-16. Yes. The rest of the stats will be a little bit weaker. Not as weak as going 18-18, 8-8-8.
Yes.
But you get 18-16, 11, 10, 8, 8.
Yes.
That's if you wanted to focus on 2 primary stats and boost those up, and then be average or lower in other categories.
I'm not sure if I'm really bad at math, but I also think that their standard array adds up to 31 points, not 32 points.
Interesting.
So it's not really relevant because like the best you can do with the points that you have remaining is turn the 12 into another 13. Because you don't have enough points at that point. But I guess the reason why they didn't do the 17 is because you don't have enough points to do that.
Okay.
With what they presented. I mean, I guess the pertinent question is the ability to buy an 18 with point buy worth not getting ability score boosts from your lineage or ancestry or heritage or anything like that? I think people like the idea of getting ability score boosts at character creation. There's something about it that is just fun. It feels like another build element of your character that you get to explore. And so I think abandoning it entirely maybe is not what people like.
I agree, but I'm also going to call out our own bias that we've been playing D&D for years and are used to that. Yeah. And so I will give Cobalt Press the benefit of the doubt because they're trying to do new things where they can. And this is probably the first place to try something a little different.
I do agree. And I think maybe we might have mentioned in a previous video that there was this idea that maybe the ability score bonus that you get at character creation is kind of irrelevant if you have a good point buy system. And I think there's very sound game design logic there. I just think that gamers as a whole like to get their +1s and +2s.
We all love boosts.
Yeah, we all love boosts. And it's kind of just one of those fun... In a weird way, the character building process needs to have a couple different puzzle pieces that, like, it's kind of like the character building process is like a Lego set. and we have to give the player a little bit of pieces to work with, and sometimes the separation of those pieces is fun just for the fact that it's satisfying to snap them together, even though, like, you know how there's some Lego pieces that, like, they only ever really do one thing. Why aren't they just one piece? But just the act of snapping it together is like, ah!
Next up, we actually have one of the most interesting parts of this document to me, and that is the Lineage and Heritage. Now, we actually get into this later in the document, but it says that in character creation, step 4 is going to be choosing a lineage and heritage. And a brief overview of what that means. Lineage and Heritage now split your racial choice into 2 separate categories, and I actually love this. The lineage has to do with your hereditary or biological traits, what you gain from just being a person of that species, whereas your heritage has to do with the way you grew up, what habitat you were living in, and more interesting than that, when we actually get into it, the lineages show you what heritages are most common for them, but they leave it open-ended for the fact that you could be human and choose a dwarven heritage or any other mix mash. And what I like about that is it really helps paint the picture of, yes, I was a human raised by elves, or I was a dwarf raised by humans. And you can have the lineage of the race that you are, but the heritage of the different place that you may have grown up in.
In this packet, we get humans, elves, and dwarves as our lineages. And then the dwarves have their Fireforged lineage and their stone lineage. The elves have cloud and grove, and the humans have nomadic and cosmopolitan. But what's interesting about the playtest packet is that it acknowledges that you could make a human character with a dwarven heritage.
Yeah.
Which I really like, that mix and match.
I do too. I think that's actually one of the strongest things in this whole packet. The thing that I like the most is this division of lineage and heritage and your ability to mix and match them, because it helps tell a story.
Yeah.
Like Aragorn in Lord of the Rings has some kind of unique traits to him that he gained by being raised by elves. And he's a human for the most part. He has some elven traits to him.
Yeah.
But he was raised for a long period of his life by elves. So he would be a human lineage who takes the cloud elf trait.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the closest I can get. Obviously, we're not exactly Aragorn here. There's a lot of
apologies to anyone that knows
if anybody's like, that's not Aragorn. Like, I know.
Yeah.
But we're trying to get there. That's the idea, though, is that you can play that character who was raised by a different species and therefore gains some interesting benefits by growing up with them.
I do think that there is a point where we start to be like, okay, so what's the difference between heritage and background? But I think that there is a way to make it well crafted and distinct.
I think that the background is going to be your profession, your job, your career, whereas the heritage is how you grew up. And I think basically the consensus we're coming to here is Kobold Press, feel free to make a ton of heritages. This is a strong point of the system. I really like it. Yeah. Let us do the lineage, heritage, background, blow that wide open. I love it.
And I really do think that there can be heritages that are strongly associated with specific lineages, but there don't have to be. There could be a subset of just, here's a bunch of heritages that work for anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also want to point out now in this document a mystery that we found. In the creating your character section, at the end there's a final checklist, which gives you your checklist from start to finish about all the things you have to do to create your character. Oddly enough, point number 5 on the final checklist is your luck points are set to 0. And nowhere else in this document does it reference what that means. So you've piqued my interest, and I want to know what these luck points are and how I'm going to be using them and how I gain them, because it looks like everybody gets luck points.
Yep. Incidentally, this final checklist is a very good barometer at indicating the things that might not change too much in what Kobold Press is doing. We still have proficiency bonuses. We still have hit points and hit dice. We still have our senses. We still have our skill proficiencies, our weapon and armor proficiencies. And we still have things like our spell saving throw DCs and prepared spells. So it looks like a lot of those things are going to stay the same. which I think is going to reflect exactly where the compatibility is going to fall. Because what we're seeing here is something that is certainly compatible with 5th edition. And a few people on our Patreon noted, like, what is the definition of backwards compatible? Like, at what point have we iterated and this is like a 5.5? And at what point are we no longer backwards compatible? I'll say for myself, if a rule set allows us to use the adventures that were written for another game system with minimal to no effort, then it's pretty backwards compatible. I think that the backwards compatibility perspective is like, is it backwards compatible for the DM or is it backwards compatible for the player?
And those are two different things.
They are two different things. And I do think that in some cases we're going to see things where it's like, this is a new system for player characters to use that's not backwards compatible. It's like you either use this new system for Lineage and Heritage, or you use the old mechanics for races and sub-races.
When it comes to character creation, it's like you're either using this or you're using 5e. But when it comes to adventures, you might just be able to grab your favorite adventure and run it using this.
I think you can easily use the Lineages and Heritages with the 5th edition classes, right? I think one of the big question marks for backwards compatibility is, are you going to be able to use 5th edition subclasses with any revisions that happen here? And I'm just going to come out and say, that is a massive design challenge. I know we and many people in the community want Cobalt Press and many others to readdress some of the imbalances in the classes that are in 5th edition. Doing that while also making all the subclasses that have been built for those classes still work is not easy. And honestly, it's not even something that I would want to try.
No.
Like, I can just tell you right now, if I was doing it, I would just be coming out and saying, we're going to be making classes that are not compatible with the old subclasses. Because I think it's hard. I genuinely think it's a big design challenge. And if you try to do that, you're not going to make everybody happy.
I can see either Cobalt Press completely reiterating on, here's the new fighter and here are new fighter subclasses, or here's some new ideas that you could adapt to your fighter, but it would be either really small changes or a massive overhaul. Landing in the middle, I think, is the hardest place to go.
I do. But I think it's actually important that we as a community acknowledge that backwards compatibility is hard. It's really, really difficult to pull off. And backwards compatibility, I personally think, iterating and backwards compatibility is also even harder if you don't want a power creep.
Yeah.
Right? And so if you want something that doesn't have power creep, that is fully backwards compatible, but also iterates on the design, I feel like at that point, like, that is very obviously the Goldilocks zone. And I think that as a community, we have to be a little bit more fair to designers in acknowledging that that's not easy.
Sometimes your porridge is a little cooler than you want it to be.
Yeah, like that's hard.
I'm honestly okay if they end up somewhere where it's like, this is partially backwards compatible. I'm okay with that. I understand that the design principles here are tough. And so if they say you can run any 5th edition adventure, but you're probably using this instead of the player's handbook, cool.
I think the milestone for backwards compatibility to me that would be really key is not, can whatever Cobalt Press does with the fighter take, say, a fighter subclass that was put out by another third-party publisher and use that, or a previous edition, but could a player that is using the 5th edition fighter with a 5th edition subclass play in a party with a player who is using the new stuff that is developed? If that is okay, I think that is
that's a success.
That's a big success for me. Mixing and matching with one character might not be possible, but characters playing in the same party together might be.
Now, moving forward with this document, we come to the backgrounds and then the lineages and heritages. We've already talked in part about the heritage options. Really, there's nothing here that we haven't seen before. Backgrounds remain generally the same concept. The thing that you will notice in this document is we have changed the word feats to talents, and that every background awards you an option of talents. So basically every character is getting quote unquote a feat at first level.
With humans actually getting 2.
Humans do get 2.
Yeah.
So this is built in here. They're calling them talents, and each background you get like 3 options to choose from for your talent, which would apply to the background you've chosen. On top of that, you get your proficiencies, your languages, all of the normal stuff. Your lineages, all pretty straightforward. What's your age? What's your speed? What's your height? And then usually there's 1 or 2 traits associated with that sort of lineage. Then we break down the heritages, which we talked about. Things like the Fireforged Dwarf getting fire resistance and other options like that. Again, nothing really surprising here. Read through the document. It's all there. It's pretty good. And it is what you would expect.
I think it does a pretty good job of making the biological traits associated with the lineages. It makes the cultural or societal traits associated with the heritages. Although we did mention how the Fireforge gives you fire resistance, but we talked about that being as like, oh, they lived close, like they grew up there. That was an acquired trait that you learned from the environment that you grew up in. So that's kind of interesting that the heritages can have like that notion of both the ecology that you grew up in or the ecosystem that you grew up in, but also the society that you grew up in.
Well, what they're saying with that is that not all dwarves are resistant to fire. Only ones that live in a volcano are, and that makes sense to me.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And the final element of that is that the backgrounds very much reflect like the learned skills and, as Kelly said, the profession that you adopted. So we have the soldier and the scholar here used as examples. What Cobalt Press has done here is instead of ideals, bonds, and flaws, they've had this category for adventuring motivation. I personally will say I don't want ideals, bonds, and flaws to go away. I really like those, and I think axing them is a mistake.
I think there's room for both. I do love the inclusion of adventuring motivation. I think that it helps with character creation to be like, why are you an adventurer? That's a question that every character needs to answer. So having these ideas in here is 2 thumbs up for me, but I do miss picking a flaw, an ideal, a bond. Even if we don't want to make ideals, bonds, and flaws and personality traits a template for how to design your characters, personality traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws, rather than a list, like saying you should think on these elements for your character creation, I think it's valuable.
Yeah, and then from there, we have the actual talents themselves. The talents are categorized into martial, magical, and technical talents, and apparently classes are going to be restricted on which talents they can choose as they progress, making the background choice actually notable because the background is an opportunity for a character to get, for example, a martial talent, even though their class only lets them take magical talents. So it's a cool place where you can mix and match things. I don't know how I feel about this. I would like to see this iterated more to see how this fully develops and if that kind of distinction is needed in the future. We'll see. Right now, it feels like a lot of the talents that are being introduced are reimaginings of some feats that we know and love.
If one of the talents looks like Warcaster, it's because it basically is Warcaster, but why would we not want Warcaster here? So having these iterations on some of the beloved feats of 5e is not a bad thing. I want those in my game.
Yeah, I do though think that restricting the classes based on types of talents might be something to reconsider, because I think that feats for me have always represented a cool way to either increase your character's specialization or increase your character's versatility. And I also really like, as a dungeon master, being able to give feats out as rewards to my players. And so a restriction, and well, the reward could break that restriction. I wonder what we gain. And also, like, what is that going to do for certain sorts of character builds and certain sorts of things? Like, it is really cool, for example, that a blade singer could potentially take some martial feats, even though the wizard class might be restricted. Maybe your subclass might expand this and let you take talents from another option. But I think that if we're going forward with this idea of backwards compatibility, maybe this is one area where we don't want to add more restrictions.
I will say that brings us to the end of the playtest packet.
Yeah.
And at this point, I'm not ready to say, hey, don't do this or do... I mean, keep going with the lineages and heritages, but I'm not going to say don't do anything that you've presented here because this is a really small sample package. I need to see how all of this plays with the classes, the subclasses, and further dive into the various talents that we're going to look at, the backgrounds, the heritages, the lineages. I want to see how it all plays together before I make any big judgments. So although I will agree with you, I'll say that at this point, if we're saying maybe think about this, also if you already have a plan in place, don't worry about what we're saying. This is a pretty appetizer-sized packet with not enough to make any distinct calls on.
That said, I do think that there's exciting stuff that we as game designers and authors that have our Drakenheim setting could really work with. I really like the idea here that Caspian, Illyrian, and Westamar could have heritages.
Yes, that's something really cool to play
So
with.
in a campaign setting, it would be really cool to have the nations and kingdoms and empires of your world, they have their national heritages, which feels appropriate. You could even have regional heritages, right? Where it's like maybe, you know, in Illyria, the Illyrian heartland has its own heritage, but the Illyrian coast has another.
Or the Illyrian desert.
Exactly, right? So that's a really... I find that for myself, as a world builder, as a designer, there's actually like some cool things that I can grab onto with that. And so now it's possible to say, oh yes, your character is a tiefling from Illyria, tiefling lineage, here is your heritage, and you have more specific choices and options to choose from in building your character.
It really helps because a lot of people, when we were designing Drakenheim, asked for Drakenheim-specific races. And we really wanted our world to be grounded in the races that already existed. There wasn't anything new for us to add.
Yeah.
But I can think of a million heritages to add.
Exactly. And so for that is something that I'm really excited about because, yeah, generic fantasy, elves and dwarves and stuff like that, there's kind of different things that you can do with them. But for me, I'm much more interested in societies and cultures in general.
Like we would get to add an Iron Helm Dwarven heritage.
Yes, we could have an Iron Helm Dwarven heritage.
Glitter Peak.
Yeah, we could do the different and reflect the different cultures and societies that exist within a setting through heritages. And that's really powerful because it does allow you to say, yes, this world has elves, but here's how they are culturally distinct in this setting.
Yes.
Overall, this is a tidbit. I do have to say, this is a taste. This is a timbit. This is an appetizer. This is an hors d'oeuvre of a bigger thing to come. And I'm really excited about what Cobalt Press is going to do with Project Black Flag and how that's going to build in a much stronger network of support for publishers that are continuing to make content for 5th edition. I think that, obviously, there's a lot of different factors at play and there's a lot of different ideas floating around in the environment right now, but full support. And I think that if you out there are interested in our perspectives on how these playtests are going to go, we would love to keep talking about them over here. So let us know what you think.
Cobalt Press, thank you for the bread basket, and I'm looking forward to the full pasta dish.
Yeah. Looking forward to the main course.
Looking forward to the main course and maybe some dessert in there too.
Yeah.
Ready for it all. I'm hungry now.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. And again, if you have any opinions on the stuff that we went over in this playtest package and what you're excited for, please let us know as well in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible because we have an amazing Patreon community that helps support our work. And there's been lots of great conversation on our patron-only Discord community about these new playtest packets, about all the things that have been coming. It feels like we are on the threshold of a lot of exciting things happening with a reinvigorated, although slightly scarred, TTRPG publishing community that has been working through the 5th edition stuff. So I'm really excited to hear these conversations and how things are going to iterate further. If you want to get involved in those chats in our community, consider becoming a patron of our show. The links are in the description below.
And if you want to check us out playing D&D 5e, you can check out our live play, which airs Tuesday evenings on Twitch. You can find all the previous episodes right up over here.
And we've got plenty more content discussing everything to do with 5th edition right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time
In the dungeon.